Could Diddy get bail? May sound like a long shot, but is there something that could maybe change the judge's mind? Well, we're going to be speaking with the bail bondsman to the stars, Ira Judelson, about whether Diddy may get out in a rumored new bail package. He has been working with Diddy's team. Plus, what can we expect about whether the rap mogul will spend the next decade or two behind bars?
He came in wearing the mask of composure. But underneath the tailored suit and that famous stare was a man unraveling. The courtroom was ice cold, filled with the kind of silence that only comes when people are bracing themselves for the collapse of something massive.
World is what's next, right? After being convicted of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution and acquitted of racketeering conspiracy and 2 counts of sex trafficking, now we ask, what is his sentence going to be on those 2 charges, the Mann Act charges? And there's also another question that we're going to address today. Could he get bail? Could he get out? You might be saying, Jesse, wait a second. He was denied bail at every turn. And you would be right, he was. Despite proposing extensive bail conditions during the course of this legal saga, including a $50 million bail package and monitoring by private security personnel, the court was not convinced. Now, by law, the defense has the burden to prove that Combs is not a flight risk or danger to the community. And given the charges, the allegations, including that he was improperly trying to contact people in the case pre-trial, he was always denied release. But then there's what happened after the verdict last week. And this is an interesting conversation. And again, we're going to be speaking with Ira Judelson in a minute, who's been working with Diddy's team on possibly getting him released. But after the verdict, the defense applied for Combs to be released from detention pending sentencing. But that request was again denied by Judge Arun Subramanian. The defense argued, look, he's no longer charged with RICO, there's no longer presumption of detention, we have his passport, there's no access to private planes, there's no criminal history, this is his first conviction, he would be a fool to mess any of this up because he was just given his life back by the jury, he wasn't convicted of the highest charges, he was facing up to life in prison, now he's not. He should be allowed to return to his property, his mansion in Florida. There'll be a $1 million bond. Now, the government argued, look, Sean Combs, he was convicted of serious charges, Mann Act violations. There was physical abuse in this case. There was prolific use and distribution of drugs. He committed crimes while under investigation, including having drugs in his hotel room when he planned to surrender to federal authorities back in September of 2024. And Judge Arun Subramanian denied the bail application, sided with the government, that these convictions on these charges, by law, they trigger the mandatory detention statute, that the defense conceded Combs is violent. They conceded that at trial, quote, we own the domestic violence. That's what the defense had said. The judge also made the point that it was impossible for the defense to demonstrate that he poses no danger, particularly given his violence after the searches of his properties and when he knew he was under investigation. That's the whole Violent Jane episode, attacking Jane, one of the victims in this case. And also that the evidence at trial showed there was a years-long pattern of abuse and violence. But despite the judge denying Combs' release once again, and given that his sentencing has officially been confirmed for October 3rd, that was agreed by both the defense and the prosecution yesterday, could he get out beforehand? It's an interesting question. Let me bring in right now a special guest. I am joined by one of the most renowned bail bondsmen, probably in the country, definitely in New York, Ira Judelson. Ira, thank you so much for coming here on Sidebar, and pleasure to meet you.
You too, Jess. Pleasure myself.
Let's talk a little bit about what you do. Talk about what you do. I don't know if everybody completely understands the process and your role in it.
You know, it's funny. Not a lot of people understand the world of bail. They think that a bondsman just raises his hand and you know, that's where it ends. With me, it starts with the people that you meet, the lawyers, the judges, the DAs, hearing about a bail, putting it together, which could take days, weeks, as in this case that we're talking about right now, Puffy. I started on this case.
And Diddy? He was the collapse. Sitting stiff, back too straight, breathing shallow. A man who had built an empire on power, fear, and illusion, now cornered by the one thing he could never control. The truth. The judge had read every document, watched every testimony, listened to every victim. And now, It was time. The gavel hadn't even dropped, and still the gravity was suffocating. The entire room leaned in as the judge looked up. Eyes fixed, voice calm, words loaded. "Mr. Combs," the judge said, "you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers. The evidence presented in this trial revealed a disturbing pattern of behavior spanning decades. Your actions caused harm. Your influence enabled silence. Today, this court will deliver the sentence you earned." And that was it. The fuse had been lit. Diddy didn't move, not at first. He just stared, like he couldn't believe this was happening to him, like this was all still some twisted remix that he could re-edit. But then the number dropped. The sentence. Years in prison. Not suspended, not reduced.
What the judge kind of goes for in terms of the sentencing, it could be, like you had mentioned, to the lower side, to the higher side, but I hate guessing in this trial at this point, because every guess that I've made has been completely wrong. So.
No, we both agreed he would get convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution, racketeering, sex trafficking, both up in the air. I'm not surprised by the jury's decision, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah, and Jesse, just some more to the schedule. For any post-verdict motions, the parties proposed that the defense file any post-verdict motions on or before July 30th of this year, and the government respond on or before August 20th. And then the government requests that if they be permitted to submit its summary of offense conduct on or before July 11th of 2025, and the defense doesn't object to that. So we'll see a lot more documents being filed that we're able to kind of talk about, hopefully a little bit more, but it seems that it's just a bunch of documents that'll be filed before the eventual sentencing hearing.
You know what I think is interesting? The post-trial motions. So typically speaking, those could be like a motion for a new trial, where the court would vacate the judgment and allow for a new trial, rarely granted, but may be done if the interest of justice so requires. There's a motion for judgment of acquittal, so the court could set aside the jury's verdict, allow the defendant to go free, and there's a motion to vacate, set aside, or correct a sentence, and I'm told that it's often successful for the purpose of correcting when there's a clerical error in the sentence. Now, assuming Combs has valid legal grounds to support any of this, I imagine he will file whatever motion he can for relief from either the verdict or the sentence. Then again, I don't know. He got a very favorable ruling. Obviously, he was convicted. He's not entirely happy with it, and his defense counsel explained that. But they also, in their press conference after the verdict, they were jubilant. They were ecstatic. And I wonder if he gets a favorable sentence, is he even going to challenge this? I mean, they seem happy.
Yeah, they seem ecstatic because the emotions that kind of ran outside of the courtroom, it was kind of double that inside the courtroom, where all the defense attorneys were hugging, they were crying. So seeing them outside in the press conference, all kind of holding hands, going up, that was just a little slice of the cake from what we all saw inside that federal courtroom. But I think it can kind of go both ways, and that's mainly because Sean Combs is still behind bars right now. The judge didn't grant him bail even after the verdict, and I think his reasoning might give us a little kind of picture into what the sentencing might possibly look like, because the judge even pointed out during his denying of Diddy's bail after his conviction, which were on counts 3 and 5, kind of talking back to what had happened in June of 2024 with Jane and the violent altercation that happened over at Jane's apartment. And so I'm thinking, if the judge is already kind of on his mind about the whole domestic violence aspect and the physical violence that was exuded from the defendant, even just last year, I think it's possible maybe the judge, even if he hears from the family, even if he hears from Sean Combs' friends, that it's possible it might be kind of a little bit of a tougher sentence than maybe the defense was expecting.
Well, look, I think the defense might be wanting to take advantage of this, right? Now, the judge said, even though I'm denying bail and I'm looking at the violence factor, it's not a preview of what I'm going to do for sentencing. But I think this is the opportunity for the defense to submit any kind of mitigating factors and have the probation officer speak to his friends and family and talk about the impact of this.
Real time. Behind real bars. And suddenly the illusion shattered. His mouth fell open. Eyes filled instantly. 1 second he looked frozen. The next he crumbled. Right there in front of the world, Sean Diddy Combs broke. The same man who once shouted, "Can't stop, won't stop" on stage was now sobbing uncontrollably in a courtroom filled with people he once thought were beneath him. The power, the arrogance, the myth. It all vanished under the weight of those years. He tried to speak, but no sound came. His chest shook, His hands trembled. The same hands that had once written contracts, made deals, manipulated lives behind closed doors. Now they were useless, powerless, just shaking fists in a courtroom that had finally said, enough. His legal team looked shattered. They'd built their whole defense around image, legacy, cultural impact. But the jury had seen through it. And the judge? The judge made it crystal clear. Fame doesn't erase facts. Victims sat silently in the gallery.
Who would say, you know what? That's not so beyond the pale of reason, because the abuse has been so entrenched in this person's mind that they then fall in love with their abuser. And so that's not something that they would, look askance upon or look down upon. So, one of the things about being in trial that I always remind my clients, is that despite all the rules that the judge gives people, no one leaves their life experience or their opinions at the courthouse door. It all makes its way into the courtroom and ultimately into the jury room. And that's why you can see such people who are on one side, like celebrating Diddy being acquitted on the much more serious charges, and other people who are like, how did this happen? I am upset. I feel like victims did not get justice today.
Right, exactly. And emotions did run really high, especially when the verdict came down, because I think I myself was pretty surprised at some of the jury's decisions in relation to some of the charges where they found him not guilty. But, obviously they made their decision. They listened to the evidence. They saw all the exhibits, and they made the decision that they did. And say come sentencing that Sean Combs is sentenced to maybe a couple years behind bars in prison. But do you think even after this trial, after everything that we've learned, after the many civil lawsuits that were also filed, do you think that there's any type of way that Sean Combs can have a comeback at this point?
Well, I think there's certainly a comeback that could be crafted and created in which we as the public may see. Listen, this is a person who has lived his life in the public light, in the limelight for decades. Okay. And so, as has been said before, fame is one of the more addictive or most addictive drugs known to man. And so he was a very famous, and now some might say infamous person. The idea that he allows the narrative to end with the way in which the evidence came in and this kind of mixed bag verdict does not is not what's the word I'm looking for? If I don't see Diddy allowing the last chapter of his book to be written with this trial, instead, the person that he's held himself out to be and who we now understand him to be is someone who is going to say, look, this was a dark chapter in my life, but now I'm going to show you the phoenix rising from the ashes. And there are other chapters. And I think that he will make an even more concerted effort to be more philanthropic, to be more of a victim's advocate. And also, once he completes these programs, he can say, look, I was once an abuser of women, abuser of drugs, abuser of fame, abuser of power and fortune, but look who I am now. And so I think that's a pretty powerful story. And frankly, people love comeback stories.
Yeah, they do love a good comeback story. But I'm curious, in your opinion, do you think that this is all just for maybe a showmanship, or do you think it's all for PR? So that way, Diddy can walk out of MDC Brooklyn or possibly a potential prison and just be like, you know what, I am a changed person. But also in that same breath, what kind of message do you think that sends to victims out there who may have been abused or, something had happened to them by a high profile figure? They want to report this to police. They want to either go to maybe a civil lawyer, all of that stuff. But then after this trial, they are like,
Some cried. Others just stared, unmoved. Because they'd already shed enough tears. Today, those tears belonged to him. The court officers approached. Diddy flinched, like he thought he still had a say, like he thought someone was going to step in. But no one did. No celebrities, no executives, no favors. Just cold metal cuffs and a man finally facing the sentence he earned. And as those cuffs clicked around his wrists, something deeper broke. This wasn't just about a man being punished. This was about a machine collapsing. A decades-long campaign of image over substance, power over people. Gone. He looked to the judge one last time, and what he saw wasn't anger. It was certainty. The officers didn't hesitate. They stood on either side of him, lifting him from the seat like a man being pulled from a dream that had turned into a nightmare. He staggered for a second, his legs refusing to support the weight of everything collapsing around him. And then the tears came harder. Not soft, not quiet. Loud, guttural sobs that filled the courtroom with a sound no one had ever heard from him before. Surrender. It wasn't grief. It wasn't regret. It was disbelief. The kind that only hits when someone who's spent decades dodging consequences finally realizes they're out of escape routes. The judge had already moved on.
I mean, we just interviewed Charlucci the other day. So I wonder if they're saying, you know what? They said to Sean Combs, listen, let's wait for October. Gives us more time to present our case to Judge Arun Subramanian. And then we had the hearing today. This monumental hearing.
Was great.
You've been in court for 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day.
Yeah.
This was what, like 7 seconds?
I think maybe even less than, I would say,
What
kind
happened?
of close to 5 minutes. So
Yeah.
get all the way down to the courthouse. I'm like seeing everybody
Which
from
is not
the trial.
close from here,
no,
so people know.
it's not. It's not. And it was hot outside too. So
all the way downtown,
walking
yeah.
all the way down, or not, I didn't walk all the way downtown, from the subway to the walk to the courthouse.
Okay.
Get there, check in on my stuff. I would say the security check-in was longer than the actual hearing.
Okay.
So it was a remote hearing. We didn't see Sean Combs in person. We didn't see any of the attorneys on both sides. We didn't even see the judge. And so what had happened was we get inside kind of the overflow room.
Oh, the overflow room, okay.
Yep. So we get inside the overflow room. There's a big, giant screen. It's completely black. But then you hear Sean Combs's voice being like, Mark, are you there? And so it was kind of like one of those dial-in type of hearings. And so we heard Mark Agnifalo's voice. Then all of a sudden we hear the prosecution's voice. It was Christy Slavic. She was accompanied by Emily Johnson, both who work on behalf of the government. And then all of a sudden, Mark Agnifalo was kind of like, you know what, we were able to work everything out as far as our sentencing date goes. And then the judge's clerk is like, oh, okay, so both parties agree, and then this matter is adjourned.
And that was it.
Yeah.
I worried that's what was going to be because when they had the letter basically working out the date, I was like, oh, what are they going to talk about? And then after that hearing is when they switched it back to October 3rd.
Yeah.
So not much there. You didn't see Sean Combs. Okay, let's talk about some other things that have been going on. First of all, big news. There's a new lawsuit that came out against Sean Combs. Okay, this is pretty disgusting. You have this unidentified John Doe who claims that in September of 2020, so relatively recently, he, Diddy, and others, they go to this warehouse out in LA that apparently contains some of the clothes of Notorious B.I.G., the rapper who was shot and killed in 1997, Sean Combs' friend. And people start taking drugs. They start wandering around this warehouse. And this John Doe claims that Combs started watching pornography on his phone. And that is when he claims, again, warning, pretty disgusting allegation, that Combs grabbed one of Biggie's t-shirts and pleasured himself with it, into it. I don't know how the best way to explain it. And even alleging that John Doe, or insisting that John Doe finish the job, so to speak. And he then claimed Combs threw the spoiled shirt onto John Doe and said, "Rip Biggie," then left. He also claimed that 15 years earlier, Combs told him to perform oral sex on him, reportedly suing for intentional infliction of emotional distress, sexual battery. Don't have a ton of information, but for somebody who has been following so many of the civil lawsuits that he now faces, 66, 67, 68, how does this fit into all of them?
Well, it seems like it's kind of showing a pattern that all the lawsuits seem to kind of allege of power, control, sexual pleasure, all of that stuff. I would say the timing of it is a little surprising given that it came after the verdict a little bit, but I think it kind of, again, goes to that pattern that a lot of the other civil suits we've seen.
The sentence had been delivered. The justice had been done. And now, the court turned its attention elsewhere. But Diddy? He was stuck, glued to the moment. Like if he cried hard enough, maybe the clock would reverse. Maybe the gavel hadn't fallen. Maybe the word guilty hadn't been said out loud. But it had. And there was no taking it back. The bailiff stepped in, guiding him toward the side door. He looked like he wanted to run, to scream, to collapse. But there was no room left for theatrics. The The same audience that once worshipped his every word now sat frozen, watching a legend fall apart piece by piece. Outside the courthouse, the media swarm was already in full frenzy. Helicopters in the air, news vans stacked along the block, cameras trained on every door, every movement, every shadow. Because this wasn't just another celebrity scandal. This was the fall of someone who had spent years making people believe he was untouchable. And now? He was just another name in the system. The footage hit the airwaves like a nuclear bomb. Diddy being escorted in cuffs, face streaked with tears, shoulders hunched in defeat. Commentators who once sang his praises now dissected every frame of his downfall. Was it real remorse or just the panic of a man finally exposed?
And these can be by just different attorneys too. It's not always the same attorney who's filing these suits, but it seems like they all kind of go to this pattern, it seems. But again, I'm just more surprised at the timing of it and when this was filed too.
To be clear, there are lawsuits that he's facing that contain allegations that were never discussed in any way in the criminal case.
Right.
But in the criminal case, was it ever alleged that he sexually assaulted men? Was it ever alleged that he grabbed men or forced them to do things, or was it mostly focused upon women?
Seems like it was mostly focused on women and that being the victims in this case. I think as far as just kind of the allegations towards men were really just having to do with the escorts or the entertainers, as they were also called in the criminal trial. But for the most part, it seemed like from what we heard in the criminal trial, which I know a lot of people are a little disappointed because they thought it would be a lot more, but really it was just kind of like just different isolated incidents involving two victims, being Jane and Cassie. But it seemed like there wasn't a lot of discussion about male victims in this trial, but there were little points that were brought up in terms of like the civil matters, those including like Bonna and her civil claim, Dawn Richard and her civil claim. I think even during the cross-examination of Cassie, one of the defense attorneys, that would be Anna Esteval, she had asked, you know, was the baby oil laced? And I was thinking back to the civil claims, because a lot of civil claims had, a lot of civil suits had claimed that
And it wasn't laced.
That it was, the civil suits claimed it was laced, but then in the criminal trial, Cassie had confirmed that the baby oil was never laced with any type of narcotics or anything like that.
By the way, Combs' legal team said in a statement to Page 6, quote, Mr. Combs' trial and acquittal on trafficking and RICO charges proves what we have been saying all along. Mr. Combs never sexually assaulted or trafficked anyone. That people continue to broadcast and file false accusations, no matter how heinous and uncorroborated, is unfortunate. But Mr. Combs will not back down. He will fight for as long as necessary to win his full vindication. I talked about it on a previous sidebar how he might tackle all these lawsuits, maybe motions to dismiss, maybe try to say, you know, these Jane and John Doe shouldn't proceed under pseudonyms. If you can convince a court of that, they may be reluctant to continue the case if they have to expose their identities. He might try to get rid of them at initial stages as much as possible.
And he was successful at that at the beginning too.
Yeah, a few of them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to ask you about the jurors, okay? So first, a juror has spoken out since the verdict. Not surprising, we had a feeling this would happen. This unnamed juror apparently spoke to ABC and said that...
Was he crying for the pain he caused or the empire he lost? The answers didn't matter anymore, because the damage had been done. The courtroom emptied slowly. Reporters whispered into phones, sending updates to every corner of the internet. Victims emerged, some clinging to each other, others walking alone, but with something in their eyes that hadn't been there before. Peace. Not full closure. That's impossible. But something close enough to breathe again. Meanwhile, inside the walls of the detention center, Diddy was processed like everyone else. No red carpet, no private room. Just fingerprints, a mugshot, a number. And for a man who once made billions branding himself as a mogul, that number hit harder than anything else. Stripped of his title, his clothes, his name. Just another inmate, sitting on a cold bench under flickering lights, surrounded by silence that wouldn't bend to his will. He didn't talk. He didn't shout anymore. He just sat there, hollow, sobbing quietly. Not because he was misunderstood, not because he was innocent, but because he finally understood. This was real. This wasn't a PR crisis. This wasn't a scandal to ride out. This was the reckoning he never saw coming. His legal team tried to regroup, filing motions, whispering about appeals. But it was too late. The verdict was in. The time was set. The court had spoken. And the world? It was already moving on.